When my husband, Tom, and I first bought our little house with 3 acres of land, it felt like a dream come true. We had spent years living in the city, cramped in a small apartment where the only greenery we saw was the potted plant on our windowsill. So when we found this place, a cozy home surrounded by wide open space, we knew it was exactly what we needed. The air smelled fresher here, the nights were quieter, and there was so much room to grow. Literally. From day one, we started planning how to make the most of our land. Tom built a chicken coop out back, sturdy and spacious enough for 6 hens. I planted a vegetable garden near the fence, carefully marking rows for tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini, and sunflowers. Every morning, I'd wake up early to water the plants or collect eggs from the coop. Watching those tiny seedlings sprout into full-grown plants gave me a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. And the chickens? They became part of the family. Each hen had her own personality. There was Biscuit, who always wandered off, and Daisy, who clucked loudly whenever she laid an egg. Life felt simple, peaceful, and perfect. For the first year, everything went smoothly. Our garden thrived, producing more vegetables than we could eat. Neighbors stopped by occasionally to admire the flowers or ask if they could buy some fresh eggs. Kids from down the street loved visiting the chickens, giggling as they scattered feed across the yard. It wasn't just about growing food. It was about building something meaningful, something real. But then things changed. A new neighbor moved in a few houses down. Her name was Karen, and she seemed nice enough at first. She introduced herself one afternoon while I was tending to the garden. "Oh, how quaint," she said, eyeing the chicken coop with a tight smile. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Maybe she wasn't used to seeing farms in suburban neighborhoods, but looking back now, I realized that moment was the calm before the storm. Karen didn't stay quiet for long. A few weeks after she moved in, a letter appeared in our mailbox. It was from the Ridgewood Heights Homeowners Association, signed by none other than Karen herself. Apparently, keeping chickens violated Rule Number 47B. No livestock allowed within residential zones. Livestock. My 6 happy hens weren't cows or pigs. They were pets with benefits. Still, I figured it was probably just a misunderstanding. Surely, Karen would see reason once I explained how harmless our setup was. Boy, was I wrong. Ignoring the letter didn't help either. A week later, another notice arrived, citing noise complaints from unnamed neighbors. Noise? Chickens don't bark or honk, they softly cluck. This was ridiculous. But Karen didn't stop there. One evening, as Tom and I sat on the porch enjoying the sunset, her car pulled into our driveway. Out she stepped, clipboard in hand, wearing a smug expression that made my stomach churn. "I'm sorry, Sarah," she said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. "If you refuse to comply with the rules, I'll have no choice but to escalate this matter." Escalate? What did that even mean? All I wanted was to live quietly and take care of my family. Why was she making this personal? Little did I know, Karen wasn't just fighting against my farm. She was declaring war. And I had no idea how far she'd go to win. Karen's threats weren't empty. Over the next few weeks, her campaign against our farm escalated in ways I never imagined. At first, it was just letters. Official-looking envelopes arriving almost daily, each one citing a new violation. The compost pile was unsightly. The cloths line violated the no visible laundry rule. Even the wind chimes hanging on our porch were labeled as excessive noise pollution. It felt like Karen had turned into some kind of suburban dictator, determined to micromanage every aspect of our lives. But the chickens were her main target. She sent inspectors to our property twice in 1 week, demanding to see permits and licenses for the coop. Tom tried to stay calm, explaining that we weren't running a commercial operation. We were just trying to live sustainably. But Karen wasn't interested in listening. Every time she showed up, clipboard in hand, her tone grew sharper, her accusations more personal. "You're ruining the neighborhood's aesthetic," she told me during one uninvited visit. Aesthetic? Was she serious? Our garden was thriving, our hens were healthy, and our home looked better than ever. How could any of that be considered a problem? What hurt the most was how quickly the community seemed to turn against us. Neighbors who used to stop by to chat or borrow eggs started avoiding us altogether. Some even avoided eye contact when they passed our house. When I asked one of them about it, she hesitated before admitting, "Karen's been talking, saying you're causing trouble." Trouble. All we'd done was try to live simply and responsibly. Yet here we were, painted as villains in our own neighborhood. Things got worse when Karen reported us to animal control. One Saturday morning, 2 officers showed up at our door, asking to inspect the coop. My heart sank as I led them outside, bracing myself for the worst. To their credit, the officers were fair. They checked the conditions of the coop, asked questions about how we cared for the hens, and ultimately gave us a clean bill of health. But the damage was done. Having strangers scrutinize our property felt invasive, humiliating. That night, I lay awake replaying the day's events in my mind, anger simmering beneath the surface. Tom noticed my frustration and tried to reassure me. "She's just jealous," he said. "Our place is beautiful, and she can't handle it." His words made me smile, but deep down, I knew this wasn't about jealousy. It was about control. Karen wanted everyone in Ridgewood Heights to conform to her vision of perfection, no matter the cost. And if that meant targeting innocent families like ours, so be it. Still, I refused to give up without a fight. I started researching HOA rules and discovered something surprising. Many of the regulations Karen cited were outdated or poorly enforced. For example, while Rule number 47B technically banned livestock, it didn't define what constituted livestock. Were backyard chickens really in the same category as cows or horses? I doubted it. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to push back, not just for us, but for anyone else who might fall victim to Karen's crusade. The turning point came during a neighborhood meeting. Karen stood at the front of the room, reading off a list of grievances against various homeowners. When she mentioned our farm, her voice dripped with disdain. "This isn't a rural area," she declared. "We have standards to uphold." Her words sparked murmurs among the crowd, but not all of them were supportive. A few neighbors exchanged skeptical glances, clearly uncomfortable with her tone. Sensing an opportunity, I raised my hand. "Excuse me," I said, standing up. "Can you explain why having a small garden and a few chickens is such a threat to the neighborhood?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Karen. For the first time, she looked flustered. "It's about consistency," she stammered. "Everyone needs to follow the rules." "But whose rules?" I shot back. "And why should those rules dictate how we live our lives?" Murmurs erupted again, louder this time. People began sharing their own frustrations about fines for minor infractions, about Karen's constant meddling. By the end of the meeting, her authority had taken a hit. She stormed out, visibly upset, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. If Karen wanted a war, she picked the wrong family to mess with. After the neighborhood meeting, I knew Karen wasn't going to back down easily. If anything, her resolve only hardened. The very next day, another letter arrived in our mailbox, this time with a hefty fine attached. Apparently, we were now violating multiple HOA regulations, and if we didn't comply immediately, legal action would follow. Legal action over chickens and a garden. It felt absurd, but also terrifying. We weren't rich people. We couldn't afford endless fines or lawsuits. For the first time, doubt crept into my mind. Maybe we should just give up. Maybe it wasn't worth the fight. But then I thought about everything we'd worked for. The hours spent tending to the garden, the joy of watching our kids help gather eggs, the pride of knowing we were doing something good for ourselves and the environment. Giving up would mean letting Karen win. And that was something I couldn't accept. Determined to fight back, I started documenting everything. Every letter, every inspection, every snide comment Karen made. I wrote it all down. I even began taking photos of our property, showing how clean and well-maintained it was. At night, after the kids went to bed, I scoured online forums and local news articles about HOAs. Turns out, Karen's behavior wasn't unique. Stories poured in from other neighborhoods where overzealous HOAs had driven families out of their homes through relentless fines and intimidation. One woman described how her HOA foreclosed on her house because she refused to pay a $200 penalty for painting her mailbox blue. Reading those stories made me angrier and more motivated to stand my ground. I also decided to reach out to our neighbors. At first, I hesitated. After all, many of them had gone silent when Karen started targeting us. But I realized they might be feeling just as trapped as we were. So, one by one, I knocked on doors, asking if anyone else had dealt with similar issues. To my surprise, several admitted they had. One couple showed me a stack of fines they'd received for leaving their trash cans out an hour too late. Another neighbor whispered that Karen had threatened to report them for having a bird bath in their front yard. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Karen wasn't just targeting us. She was terrorizing the entire community. That's when I had an idea. What if we banded together? Alone, we were vulnerable. Together, we could be a force to reckon with. I suggested forming a secret group, a coalition of homeowners dedicated to standing up to Karen and exposing her tactics. At first, people were hesitant. "She'll retaliate," one neighbor warned. "She'll make life miserable for anyone who opposes her." But eventually, fear gave way to frustration. Enough was enough. We agreed to meet weekly, sharing updates and strategizing ways to push back. Meanwhile, I took matters into my own hands. I invited a local reporter to visit our farm, hoping to shine a light on what was happening. When she arrived, I gave her a tour of the property, pointing out the thriving vegetables, the happy hens, and the sustainable practices we'd implemented. She snapped photos and asked thoughtful questions, clearly intrigued by our story. A few days later, an article appeared online titled *Suburban Farm versus HOA Tyranny. One family's fight for freedom. Overnight, it went viral. Comments poured in from readers across the country, praising our efforts and condemning Karen's behavior. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we weren't alone. Karen, of course, wasn't pleased. She showed up at our door the morning after the article published, her face red with rage. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she spat. "This isn't over." She stormed off without waiting for a response, but there was something different about her demeanor this time. Her usual confidence seemed shaken, replaced by desperation. It was subtle, but I noticed it, and it gave me hope. The battle was far from over, but momentum was shifting in our favor. Neighbors who once avoided us started reaching out, offering support and solidarity. Even Tom, who had always preferred to avoid conflict, admitted he was proud of how far we'd come. "We might actually win this," he said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. Win or lose, I knew one thing for certain. Karen had underestimated us. And that was a mistake she'd lived to regret. As the days passed, Karen's behavior grew more erratic. She seemed determined to crush us, but her desperation only made her tactics more reckless and more transparent. One morning, I woke up to find bright orange spray paint on our driveway. In bold letters, it read, *Violator*. My heart sank as I stared at the graffiti, anger bubbling inside me. Tom clenched his fists and muttered under his breath, "This has gone too far." But we'd refused to let her scare us into submission. Instead, we turned the incident into fuel for our fight. I snapped photos of the vandalism and shared them with the reporter who had written about us before. Within hours, the story updated online, now highlighting Karen's latest stunt. The comments section exploded with outrage. People called her actions childish, petty, and downright cruel. Even some of our neighbors, who had previously stayed silent, started speaking out publicly. One man posted on social media, saying, "I'm tired of living in fear because of this woman." Enough is enough. Karen's response was predictable. She doubled down. At the next HOA meeting, she arrived armed with a stack of papers, accusing us of exaggerating her behavior and manipulating public opinion. "They're trying to ruin my reputation," she declared, pointing a finger at me during her rant. Her voice trembled with frustration, and for the first time, cracks appeared in her polished facade. Several homeowners exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. But the real turning point came when Sarah, a retired lawyer who lived 2 streets over, joined our cause. She had initially kept her distance, wary of getting involved, but after reading the news coverage, she decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. "What Karen is doing isn't just unfair, it's potentially illegal," Sarah explained during one of our secret meetings. She offered to help us review the HOA's bylaws and financial records, searching for inconsistencies or evidence of abuse. What she uncovered shocked all of us. It turned out that Karen had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, everything from spa treatments to designer handbags. Worse still, many of the fines issued to homeowners hadn't been recorded properly, disappearing into thin air. Armed with this information, we filed a formal complaint with the City Council, demanding an investigation into the HOA's finances. The process was slow and frustrating, but finally, officials agreed to look into it. Karen, sensing the walls closing in, became unhinged. She began patrolling the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff, jotting down notes whenever someone parked in the wrong spot or left their garbage cans out overnight. Her behavior alienated even her closest allies on the HOA board, who distanced themselves from her antics. Rumors spread that they were considering removing her as president, though no one dared say it aloud. Despite the mounting pressure, I felt a renewed sense of hope. For months, we'd been fighting an uphill battle, but now the tide was turning. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact smiled and waved as they passed our house. Some even stopped by to drop off fresh produce or baked goods as a show of support. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. One evening, as Tom and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You know, I think we might actually win this thing," he said with a grin. I nodded, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Winning wasn't just about saving our farm anymore. It was about reclaiming our community, standing up for what was right, and proving that kindness could triumph over cruelty. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She was cornered, and cornered animals are dangerous. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed we had the upper hand. Whatever happened next, I was ready. The investigation into the HOA's finances was like a ticking time bomb, and everyone in Ridgewood Heights could feel it. The atmosphere shifted overnight. Whispers filled the air at grocery stores, parks, and school pickup lines. People who had once feared Karen now spoke openly about her bullying tactics. Even those who hadn't joined our cause directly seemed to sense that change was inevitable. Karen, however, wasn't going quietly. If anything, she became more aggressive. Inspections of our property increased, sometimes twice a day. She'd march through our yard with her clipboard, pointing out every minor infraction, as if she were building a case for some imaginary court. "Your mailbox is crooked," she snapped one afternoon. "And these weeds along the fence line are unacceptable." I bit my tongue, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. Instead, I smiled sweetly and said, "Thanks for letting us know, Karen. We'll get right on it." But behind closed doors, we were strategizing. Sarah, the retired lawyer, had become an invaluable ally. She helped us draft petitions calling for reforms within the HOA, including stricter oversight of its finances and clearer guidelines for enforcement. Dozens of neighbors signed on, emboldened by the growing momentum. When we presented the petition at the next HOA meeting, Karen looked like she'd been punched in the gut. Her face turned red, and her voice trembled as she tried to dismiss our concerns. "These changes aren't necessary," she insisted. "Everything is fine the way it is." "Fine." Another homeowner shot back. "You call harassing people and wasting money on frivolous fines. Fine. This isn't leadership, it's tyranny. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. For the first time, Karen was outnumbered, and she knew it. Things reached a boiling point during a particularly heated gathering. Karen accused me of orchestrating a smear campaign against her, claiming I was jealous of her position and trying to ruin her life. "You've turned everyone against me," she shouted, slamming her fists on the table. The dramatics might have worked before, but not anymore. Neighbors rolled their eyes and exchanged knowing glances. One man even muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Nobody's buying your act anymore, Karen." And then came the moment no one saw coming. As Karen gestured wildly, making yet another grandiose accusation, she tripped over her own designered heels. In slow motion, she stumbled forward, arms flailing, before crashing headfirst into the water cooler stationed near the front of the room. Water splashed everywhere, drenching her from head to toe. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by awkward laughter that quickly turned into full-blown giggles. Even the HOA board members struggled to keep straight faces. For a few seconds, Karen stood frozen, dripping wet and utterly humiliated. Then, without saying a word, she grabbed her soaked clipboard and stormed out of the room. It was surreal, like watching a villain in a movie meet their comeuppance. Some neighbors clapped softly, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Tom leaned over and whispered, "Sweet karma just delivered." That incident marked the beginning of the end for Karen. Her influence crumbled almost overnight. Homeowners openly mocked her theatrics, and attendance at HOA meetings plummeted because no one took her seriously anymore. Even her closest allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her toxic behavior. Eventually, she resigned from the board, citing personal reasons. No one bothered to ask for details. As the dust settled, the city's investigation confirmed what we already suspected. Karen had misused HOA funds for years. With the evidence laid bare, the board implemented sweeping reforms, including lifting restrictions on small-scale farming. Our chickens and gardens were officially here to stay. Looking back, I realized something important. Standing up to Karen wasn't just about protecting our farm. It was about reclaiming our community, showing that kindness and cooperation could overcome fear and division. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, one thing was certain: we had proven that together, we were stronger than any bully. With Karen out of the picture, life in Ridgewood Heights began to change in ways I never expected. At first, it felt strange, almost too quiet. For months, her constant meddling had been a dark cloud hanging over the neighborhood. Now that she was gone, the air seemed lighter, freer. People smiled more often, waved as they passed each other on the street, and even lingered longer during chance encounters. It was like we'd all been holding our breaths, waiting for the storm to pass, and now we could finally exhale. The HOA board worked hard to rebuild trust. They held open forums where residents could voice their concerns without fear of judgment or retaliation. Sarah, the retired lawyer who had helped us expose Karen's corruption, was appointed interim president. Under her leadership, the rules were rewritten with input from the community. Gone were the nitpicky regulations about mailbox angles and laundry visibility. In their place came common-sense guidelines designed to foster harmony rather than control. The new policy even included a section supporting sustainable living practices, like backyard gardens and small-scale farming. When the updated handbook arrived in our mailboxes, I flipped through it with tears in my eyes. It felt like a victory not just for us, but for everyone who had ever felt stifled by Karen's iron grip. Neighbors started embracing the changes almost immediately. Flower beds popped up in yards that had once been barren lawns. Clotheslines reappeared, swaying gently in the breeze. Someone down the street installed a beehive, while another family built a greenhouse. Even kids got involved, planting sunflowers along sidewalks and painting rocks to decorate shared spaces. The transformation was beautiful, not just visually, but emotionally. Ridgewood Heights wasn't perfect, but it was becoming something better, a real community. For Tom and me, The farm thrived more than ever. With Karen no longer breathing down our necks, we expanded the coop to accommodate 4 new hens and added a small pen for 2 baby goats. Ellie, our youngest, named them Buttercup and Daisy, and they quickly became part of the family. Every morning, she'd race outside to feed them, giggling as they nibbled hay from her hands. Watching her joy reminded me why we'd fought so hard to create a space where love, creativity, and freedom could flourish. Karen didn't stick around to see the changes. A few weeks after resigning from the HOA board, she packed up her belongings and moved away. No farewell party, no heartfelt goodbye, just an empty house and a for sale sign planted in the yard. Some neighbors whispered that she couldn't handle the embarrassment. Others speculated she'd fled to avoid further scrutiny over the financial scandal. Either way, her absence was a relief. Life felt brighter without her shadow looming over us. Still, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness when I thought about her. Beneath all the anger and cruelty, there must have been pain driving her actions. Maybe she felt powerless in other areas of her life and sought control wherever she could find it. Or maybe she truly believed she was doing what was best for the neighborhood. Whatever the reason, I hoped she'd find peace someday, even if it meant leaving Ridgewood Heights behind. As summer approached, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Plans for a block party took shape, complete with live music, food trucks, and games for the kids. On the day of the event, I stood on our porch watching families gather in the cul-de-sac, laughing and chatting like old friends. Tom wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "You did this," he said softly. "You brought everyone together." I shook my head. "Not me," I replied. "All of us, together." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Life in Ridgewood Heights now feels like a completely different chapter, one filled with warmth, connection, and a renewed sense of purpose. The block party turned out to be everything we hoped for and more. Kids ran barefoot through sprinklers while parents swapped stories over plates of homemade food. Someone brought a guitar, and by the end of the evening, an impromptu sing-along had everyone laughing until their sides hurt. Even the shyest neighbors joined in, drawn out of their shells by the simple joy of being together. For the first time, Ridgewood Heights felt less like a neighborhood and more like a family. The changes didn't stop there. Inspired by our newfound unity, people started working together on projects that benefited everyone. A group of volunteers cleaned up the park at the end of the street, planting trees and building a playground for the kids. Another team organized a community garden where residents could grow vegetables and herbs to share. When winter rolled around, we hosted a holiday lights contest, not because it was mandatory, but because people genuinely wanted to celebrate together. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about making memories. Our farm became a hub of activity. Neighbors stopped by regularly, not just to admire the chickens or pick fresh tomatoes, but to connect. Some offered to help with chores, while others brought baked goods as thanks for the eggs we shared. One day, an elderly woman named Margaret, who had once avoided eye contact with me during Karen's reign, showed up with a basket full of seed packets. "Thought you might like these," she said shyly. "They're heirloom varieties. My grandmother used to grow them." That small gesture meant so much. It was proof that walls between us were coming down, replaced by bridges built on kindness. Tom jokes that I've become a local celebrity. He teases me whenever someone asks for gardening tips or chicken raising advice, calling me the queen of suburban farming. But honestly, none of this feels like my doing. It's the result of all of us standing together, refusing to let fear divide us. Every flower planted, every meal shared, every laugh exchanged is a testament to what happens when people choose compassion over control. Still, there are moments when I think about Karen, not with anger, but with curiosity. Where did she go? Is she happy? Did she learn anything from her mistakes? Sometimes, late at night, I imagine running into her somewhere, a coffee shop, maybe, or a farmer's market. I picture myself smiling, saying something like, "Hey, remember me?" Would she apologize? Or would she still see me as her enemy? Maybe neither scenario will ever happen, but imagining it helps me process everything we went through. One thing is certain. Karen's actions taught me resilience in ways I never expected. Before this ordeal, I would have backed down at the first sign of conflict. Now, I know how to stand firm, even when the odds seem impossible. And I'm not alone. Our neighbors emerged stronger too, united by the shared experience of fighting for what matters most. Together, we proved that no bully, no matter how relentless, can break a community determined to thrive. As I sit on the porch watching the sunset one evening, I reflect on how far we've come. The chickens cluck softly in the background, and the scent of fresh herbs drifts through the air. Ellie skips across the yard, Buttercup the goat trailing behind her like a loyal puppy. Tom sits beside me, sipping his coffee, and says, "You know, I think we finally found our happy ending." I nod, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. This isn't just our home anymore. It's a place where dreams take root, where courage blooms alongside zucchini vines, and where people care for each other as much as they do their gardens. Sweet karma may have dealt Karen her downfall, but for us, it delivered something far greater, a second chance to build a life rooted in love, freedom, and community. And that, more than anything, makes every struggle worth it.